Hello and welcome to the Gathering Place, the place to gather on Sunday afternoon. And we're so glad that you could join us today. We encourage you to share this with other folks, let them know about the content that we are talking about on here. And also, we want to hear from you. We want you to comment and like on and participate in what we're doing here. And we want your feedback. If there's something that you'd like us to talk about, or if there's something that we discussed that richly blesses you, please let us know. So thank you again for tuning in. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce our host for today's show. We have Ben and Talora Bookie, and welcoming back this week is Ken Shelton. So stay tuned for an action-packed gathering place. Ken, take it away.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. It's good to all be back together. We've been in our different places, and now we're here. We've been talking for the last couple of weeks about the impact of social media and the feeling that we have to compare ourselves, and how that diminishes our sense of personhood and takes away from us a feeling of our own personal influence in the world. And as we have talked about that, the thought has occurred to me that it's not just social media, it's media in general. My father passed away a few years ago, about 4 years ago, actually, and he was 95, and he was born in 1924. And would from time to time tell me about the first time he ever saw a television set. He had just been relieved from his duties in World War II from the U.S. Navy, fighting abroad. And he was walking downtown somewhere, and people were standing around this store window. And he went in to see what it was, and it was a television set. People were in another place, and they were sending a signal to that store, and he could not believe it, and they bought one. So anyway, we hear from time to time, we hear people say about that, "Oh, I remember the good old days," which is really sort of an unfortunate way to reminisce, because every day is good in its own way, I suppose. But what we refer to as the seasons where what we feel are the majority of emphasis these days is on anxiety and depression, seems largely to have come since World War II. And I know that that is a big sweeping generalization, but bear with me, please. Before World War II, well, during World War II, our country was united like never before. Prior to that, people had their business, home lives, farming, whatever it was, or whatever region you lived in. And then after World War II, consumerism, capitalism, the big American engine began to work, and all of the changes that people had put into making America the greatest, and I'm speaking to folks in America in case you're watching us somewhere else, it blossomed. So you have major church denominations, you have corporations like General Motors and Ford Motor Company and Chrysler, and even though they started beforehand, they took off like race cars, and it was amazing. So along with all those inventions came television. Before that was radio, and then does anybody remember the era of the CB radio? Huh? Come on, who had a CB radio, and what was your handle? The CB, Tom?
Yeah.
What was your handle? Dare you
Oh,
tell us?
I don't remember.
That's convenient.
Yeah, that was a long time ago. I'd have to really think about that one.
Yeah, that's okay. I didn't have a CB. Did you, Ben? Tell Laura.
My grandpa and my dad
Yeah. So they were a big deal. It was all about trying to connect with people. It seemed like such a wonderful ideal, didn't it? And a
Mhm.
very idealistic thought that we should all connect and be together. And then I remember when I bought my first fax machine in the office, and I could ask Tom and he would fax me something and it would show up in my office and I could look at it on that squeaky paper that first came through on the fax machine. Like, oh my gosh, he just sent it. And here, which soon became the tone. Yeah. Didn't have dot matrix printers, but then it became the sound of the internet, trying to log on through your telephone, and then somebody's trying to get online. We finally made it. And one of the arguments about, there were good old days and la-di-da, and there have always been the same levels of trauma and dysfunction. It's just that we're more aware of them now. Well, that's not necessarily true. It's almost like it's become a self-fulfilled prophecy. And so here we are now. We have every day on the internet and on television and in film, we have every instance of things that have triggered us, from war to famine, just watching the news, listening to it, killing, violence, rioting, political unrest. It's in our face. We cannot get away from it unless we choose to just not be involved in any form of media. And so the reason we bring it up is because built into all of that noise are all sorts of triggers. And I don't know what triggers one person versus another, but it's in there, I can guarantee you. The disenchantment with everyday life. We hear more statistics now than we have ever heard in our life. The disproportionate number of unhappy people, or the decline in church attendance, or, and we could draw all sorts of conclusions from that. But that's my introduction to our discussion tonight. And I would like to ask Ben and Talora and Tom to feel free to agree, disagree, chime in, give your thoughts and opinions to it. How do you see media in general, a platform or platforms, for a variety of trigger points for people to react emotionally and find themselves distressed? And then that begins to spiral.
So sorry, I still don't have a voice, so hopefully everybody can
It's
hear
better.
me. Thanks. During the pandemic, especially because everybody's at home, everybody's in their houses, depression increased 25% and anxiety increased worldwide. So I think that if we reflect back on that, we're going to notice that, like, even over the past 25 years, there was a 70% increase in anxiety. And this is all found in consumersnotice.org, found online. Suicides increased, cyberbullying. A lot of teens are facing cyberbullying. I have so many kids that I see that they're being bullied, and a lot of it is behind closed doors.
Okay, that's good.
Well, I think, I mean, yeah, I mean, we can look at it. We can look at all the statistics, and everything has increased, and it's, we can talk cause and effect or correlation, but it's definitely correlated to the increase in media of all forms, really. And it's not just television, but the internet and things like that. And so when we look at that, we're like, okay, like this is a problem, but why would that cause anxiety, right? I mean, let's really look at what the cause is. Is it just because of what we're watching or listening to, or is it just the media itself? And there's some, research out there. It's just we're busier than ever with so many different things, and part of it, I wonder, I mean, research hasn't fully answered this question, but some of the thoughts about it are, because we're so busy with these things, but what are we actually accomplishing in it? You know, in the good old days, right? Like our stress and worry was just trying to survive,
Right.
right? You know, if you weren't out, tilling the field, right, you're gonna die over the winter. Um, and so like a lot of our busyness, so to speak, then really was about, just trying to live. And but in that sense, we're also accomplishing things like we're taking care of ourselves and our families. That doesn't happen when I'm watching TV or watching the news or listening to a podcast. Of course, we're on our broadcast here on media, but it is about picking and choosing. And I think this is a really relevant conversation because once again in the U.S. it's big election year, and every 4 years I have this conversation with numerous people about turn off the news because they're so
Yes.
stressed out about what's going on. And I'm like, stop. Like, and some people get almost relentless about it, just constantly looking at CNN and Fox News and MSNBC and all of these other ones, just like scanning constantly and reading all these things. And whichever side you want to be on, you're going to find awful things.
Mhm.
You're right. Can I just throw this out first as some sort of justification for my observation and what I said at the beginning? If you just do a Google search on media and trauma, you will find immediately you will find your page loaded, replete with information from the National Institute of Health about
Mhm.
media and trauma. But our most valuable source is Wikipedia. In an article called Vicarious Trauma After Viewing Media, and it begins, and I didn't see this before I suggested our topic. Over the last 50 years, there has been an increase in the different types of media that are accessible to the public. Most people use online search engines, social media, and other online news outlets to find out what's going on in the world. This increase can lead to people easily viewing negative images and stories about traumatic events that they would not have been otherwise exposed to. One thing to consider is how the dissemination of this information may be impacting the mental health of people who identify with the victims of the violence they hear and see through the media. The viewing of these traumatic videos and stories can lead to what is called the vicarious traumatization of the viewer.
Mm.
So I guess it's a thing. I
Mhm.
saw Tom's screen light up and I jumped right in front of him. Sorry about that, brother. Go ahead.
I was just clearing my throat. No, seriously. No, but yeah, there is so much to that, and based on where people are. So I was going to share this earlier that if you look back at the time when like Sanford and Son was on, and all our family,
Yeah.
right? Sanford and Son, made fun of white people. All in the Family made fun of black people, and it was just that's what it was in that season. But moving forward, I mean, that would be out of the question for either of those to exist really in this day and age that we're in because of the political correctness or whatever you want to call it. And so I think a lot of things have shifted in our uh, social media landscape of things that were or were not deemed offensive. For instance, and I may be getting off course here with what you were trying to say, Ken, but also even with the changing of the names of the of different NFL football teams, of their team name and so forth because it might be offensive to other people, and so I don't know where that particular place began, but I think that some of this stuff that we hear and that we deal with is uh, someone along the line had claimed that this was hurting a lot of people, and we need to stop doing it.
Hmm.
And so when that has been categorized as something that is now offensive, it now it's almost like what can you put out on social media or anything for that matter that won't be offensive to somebody somewhere in their walk of life. So, for instance, my sister was killed in 2015 by a hit and run. And so it's difficult for me to watch anything that involves someone getting hit by a vehicle, right? Even when I tried to play the game Frogger with my wife, it was hard for me to play that game, for early on because of the trauma that comes as a result. And so, but Frogger's a wonderful game to play, right? And sometimes people do get hit by cars and things of that nature. And so where does that line get drawn? Because we end up putting ourselves in a place as a society as to where everything is off limits because everything is going to offend someone at some point in time or just bring trauma to them. And so, what is that for me versus what is that for you, and what is that for the next person? And so, I think that I hope I'm bringing up a good point
Good
here
point.
is
Yeah,
to
good point.
to find out what that thing is because what offends me may not offend you and vice versa. But who's the one that determines who gets to make that determination? That's my
Well,
question.
I think it's more of an individual thing. Really, we've created it into this big, I, I mean, some things into this big, huge, like everybody has to do it, what they call it, the cancel culture. Just because one person doesn't like or is offended, then everybody should be. And I think that it's really an individual thing. If you don't like it, then don't watch it.
Yeah, and I think, and it is a good point because think about all of the anxiety that happens around these things, and I mean, this will sound harsh, maybe, but I certainly wouldn't necessarily say this to somebody in counseling like this, but you are responsible for your triggers. Nobody else is, and
All right, say that again.
um,
That's really important.
you are responsible for your triggers.
What do you mean by that?
No one else is responsible for that.
You're responsible to do what about them? I think people need to hear that.
So you are responsible to manage those, to deal with the feelings and thoughts and behaviors that come with those.
That's excellent.
And unless you're a child, right? In which case, mom and dad are responsible to help you with that, but to teach you how to manage your own. But it's a big thing. And our society, our world really is kind of, for a while gone to that other extreme, like, oh, everybody else is responsible for it. And and it's not about not caring about anybody. Like if I know something is triggering to Laura, I'm going to make an effort not to do that. That's biblical, right?
Right.
And I mean, we can put that in the, if I know something's a stumbling block, right? I'm not going to do that. Necessarily. I might, but depends. So, but you know what I mean? Like um,
Being a
but
guy, you might throw it out there just for fun.
it could happen, right? That's how guys bond, right? But but it is we create these things that create anxiety, and so much. Where did we learn these things? Right, in media, right? I mean, if anybody out there is a beer drinker, which I'm not, but there was that big was it Bud Light, right? Like the big they became woke or something, and there people were like don't drink that, right? And they lost billions of dollars.
Right.
Would anybody else have known about any of that if it weren't for media? And if people weren't consuming that constantly?
Well, I don't think that we should do away with media. I think that we should become more sophisticated in the way we manage media.
Yeah.
And more deliberate in the way we manage media. I really like what you said about that, Ben. Tom posing that particular situation, and then you saying that all of us are responsible for our own triggers. It really takes the scapegoat mentality out of our hands. I would say that for Americans, we've built our society on the idea of a government functioning with representation. But initially, that idea was that a community of people would express their wishes to a representative who would then make those wishes known in a political setting. Well, we somehow have anointed a value that never was prominent before, but it sounded so good, and that is that everybody should have a voice at the same time, which is what the internet has done. Everybody has a voice. I remember when it all started, my physician said, "Oh no, we've just activated every crazy person in the universe to have a voice." And, he was really upset about it. And I said, "Well, I think it's really good." And, he was right in a lot of ways. But then I'm saying this because if you're in a small community, you don't have all that media, and it's 1827, and you let your representatives know what your thoughts and feelings are, if it's possible, and then they take those to the it wasn't always a perfect way to rule America, as we know from the divisions of the North and the South, and how that sometimes some people were stopped from voting and expressing their ideas. My point is that somewhere in there, we developed this idea that we call collective consciousness, that we refer to it a lot now, a collective consciousness. I never heard of collective consciousness until about, I don't know, 10 years ago, 12 years ago. Did you guys? I mean, I knew it was probably a thing if you would have brought it up, but I didn't know about it. Actually, people started talking about it in the early 19th century, 1823 or something. But in terms of philosophy, but now it's a thing. We trust God less, and we look to the universe.
Mm-hmm.
The universe is our personalized savior in many instances, not mine, but not yours. And now we're all attuned to each other because each of us are part of a collective consciousness, which is such an abstract concept. I get it and I understand it. But if we've sensitized that concept, now we have to pick up everybody's offense. And I think that's what Tom was talking about. You're offended about something. Well, you know what? I'm going to be offended about it too. Well, maybe I really don't have an opinion about it, but somebody tells me I should. And then everybody is upset about something. And so in some instances, it's not just a trigger about one particular thing, but it's this free-floating, sort of under the surface anxiety that's ready to spring forth when something happens that does trigger us. Does that make sense? What do you
It
think about
does.
collective consciousness? Is that a
Well,
play term?
and it has sparked. I was reading a book, and then it was talking about this idea about how online, like, even really extreme ideas become normalized, and there's a way that these people go about it. Like, we have this idea about internet trolls, right? Like, but it's broader than that, and but how these people really like push these ideas and make it seem normal. And I was trying to find out what the name was, because of course I can't remember, um but but we do see this effect, right? And so people really do, so it seems like this is our right collective norm and all of these, right? Because everybody's saying this, or this seems to be really popular. When we really examine it, is it, does it stand up to truth, right? And does it stand up to logic and reason? And usually they don't, but they make it sound good. And um the context of like the article I was reading about, it was, remember Amanda Knox? She
Mhm.
was arrested in Italy for murdering her roommate, and turned out it was not true. But there's a whole online thing that still to this day are after her and going on about how she really did do it. And they got all their sources, and it seems legit, right? And so if all you see is that, if you Google it, a lot of that will pop up. And so, so in a sense, like it's hard, like, well, I guess I better join that, right? Because that's what everybody is saying.
Oh, maybe it's true, the conspiracy theory problem,
Yep.
which, we give voice to a lot of conspiracy theories.
Mm-hmm.
And there are, I don't know what the percentage would be. Ben, Laura, you may know the percentage of, I don't even know if that's a logical way to present it, but let me say it this way. I remember the first time I became aware of someone who was agoraphobic.
Mm.
I had no idea what it was. I was 20 something and
Mm-hmm.
I was a youth pastor, and it was 1973, and one of our primary people at church who was very involved in things couldn't come to anything anymore.
Yep.
She froze. She wouldn't leave the house. She wouldn't get out. She bought into all kinds of strange ideas. She was everybody's friend, and all of a sudden she's absent. And then we find out that she is agoraphobic, which none of us really had any idea what agoraphobia was, and we had to all learn about it. And which led us to realize that none of us had any idea what a phobia was. We didn't even know
Yeah.
what a phobia was, much less agoraphobia, that everything can set you off.
Mhm.
And ultimately it created a greater empathy for us. So I think there's a positive side if we are sophisticated enough to see it that way. But surely there is a shelf life on craziness in the media, on things that we listen to. I mean, if I said I have some sons-in-law who I love dearly. One in particular, hi Stefan. He loves to play around with conspiracy theories. And hey, there are some people that said that the CIA blew up the Twin Towers and we never did land on the moon. Well, that's playful to an extent, right? It's playful. That's not harmful. Nobody's being hurt by that unless you're a victim of the Twin Towers, 9/11. But we talked, I believe it was last week, about how, or the week before, about how when you are in public and if you've heard a gunshot and then you hear a car backfire, it'll startle you and then you'll have a real strong reaction to it. Well, what is the difference between a strong reaction and being triggered to enter into all of the aspects of what's going on in your life? Sorry, somebody's texting me and my ringer is going boing, boing.
We heard it.
It sounds like I really hit the trifecta. So where does, oh, that startled me, and it triggered me and I smacked my wife. Where do we know?
Mhm.
What's that buffer?
Yeah. Well, I think it's pretty individualized too, right, for everybody, because some people go through trauma but don't have the long-term effects from it, and so it does. It just kind of differs, but when it's becoming harmful to your life and to others, right? That's your line. So wherever that line fell, that was it for you. And like, and some aren't so bad. Like, I hate snakes. Don't want anything to do with snakes, right? I've worked on it a little bit, but you know, that's it's kind of a harmless thing, right? So if I see a snake, well, I'm just gonna jump away from it.
Sure.
That's that. But does it become a problem at some point? Like, what if I'm having nightmares about snakes all the time? All right. What if I won't go outside because I might run into a snake? What if I won't go to the zoo because they have snakes there? Can't go to Petco because they have snakes, right?
There
So,
you
the
go.
cats
Yeah.
are just going to starve. So,
Well, you have an awareness now also of highly sensitive people. These are things we weren't aware of, you know, 30, 40 years ago, which to young people sounds like a long time. I know by looking at me online, you can't believe I'm 71, but it is. I'll sign a document. But, I remember always saying how sensitive I was as a person. And people who would meet me and know me say, you know, you're such a sensitive person. But they would say that in a positive way because they thought I was sensitive to the Holy Spirit when I led worship, or I was sensitive in conversation. But on the other side, I was also sensitive to anything that would come close to triggering my trauma. And but I didn't know it.
Mm-hmm.
I was not aware of, I wasn't tuned into it, so I didn't know why I would fall into a depression or why I would. I mean, later I realized and found out why. But the sensitivity, you know, we have conversations about autism, conversations about uh, a few people, none that I know, who have attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. I don't know any of these people in my world. But and I certainly would not fall in that category. Oh, what's that? Anyway, uh, we have labels for things. You have to be aware of them. You're in school now. You have to be aware of these things. You have to have an opinion about those things. And that's good
Mm-hmm.
to a point. But there are just so many places and ways to be set off.
Yeah.
And Taylora mentioned the pandemic. There's one thing happened in the pandemic which really, I think, hurt our collective consciousness. And that is we diminished the importance of going to church.
Mm.
Because if you have all these places to become triggered and you have just one or two places to find peace, your life is very out of balance in that equation. It doesn't work out. Because if you only go on Sundays, and if the pattern of the way the service happens brings you peace, if you go to a church that observes the liturgy and the unfolding of the liturgy, you know, if that's beautiful to you, and if that brings some sort of unity of thought in your world, or if reading poetry does that for you, or whatever it is, if we have places that make us sane, we should cling to those, as many as we can, as opposed to clinging and continuing to watch the things that make us crazy. And there's a scripture about that: cling to what is good,
Mm-hmm.
abhor that which is evil. And I think that's right at the very bottom of the subject, is we really have trouble deciding what's good and what's evil in terms of how it affects us.
Yep.
One of the things that, I'm sorry, one of the things we talk to people a lot about with anxiety and depression, especially if it's connected to social media, find a hobby, do something that's going to distract you from it. You know, like you're talking about church, right? Being part of a small group, reading your Bible, journaling. One of my new things is embroidery. You know, there's tons of things that you can do. Gardening, we've got our flowers, but there's other things you can do instead of sitting there and allowing those things to enter your mind. The negative. We talk a lot about guarding your heart, and I believe that's Proverbs 4:23. It's a very wellspring of life. And if you're pouring and pouring and pouring negative in it, that's what it's going to produce, negative.
Just having that sensitivity about your own self, that awareness is so important, right? You know, like I talked earlier, like I'm always telling people, like, stop looking at the news, right? Yeah, yeah. My favorite word, boundaries, right? We need boundaries for ourselves around so many of these things, right? If it's harmful, if this media is harmful to me, if it's causing me stress and anxiety, I need to do something about it. And nobody else is going to do that for me, right? You know, you can come see me, right? You know, professionally, right? Um, that's cool, but guess what I'm going to do? Well, what are you going to do about it?
Mm.
Right? You know, what can you do to change that? You know, turn it off. You know, I keep boundaries around that. You know, like I scroll the news once a day. You know, so I know what's going on. If it looks important, you know, I'll read a little bit more about it. Um, you know, because otherwise you can get obsessed with it and just like constantly trying to find something to make either which will probably increase your anxiety, but you're trying to make yourself feel better, and you're doing the exact opposite in the process. And so many of the things are like that.
Well,
You
based
can
on our
start.
discussion about social media and some of the things that you have brought up, all of you have brought up, I stopped watching the news for 2 weeks, and it was blissful.
Hmm.
It was blissful. I noticed a week into it that I had not just a passing feeling of relief and of peace, but an abiding sense of peace and an ability to hear the Holy Spirit more clearly, because there was not a competing voice that I had to pay attention to, because I'm an information hound. I like to research things. So, I'll do that. If I'm left to myself, I'll go through the books and go online and find things and make people think I know stuff. But actually, I really enjoy to do that. But stopping that, constant listening to the news was really a good thing.
Hey, Ken, I think that we're coming to an end of time here.
Oh no, it's the end of the world again.
Yes, and so we'd like to invite everybody to comment, share.